You're tuned in to Watch This with Eryk and Brandon, the show where we make a friend watch a movie or TV show that they've never seen before. What do they think? Is their opinion the same as yours? That is what we find out. However, I mean, that's what we normally do. Today,
yeah,
it's
a
going to
little
be
bit different this time around.
Just a little bit different. We because our whole show really started off with a conversation that everybody has had with their friends and family. Like, hey, I just saw this great movie. Have you seen it yet? No, I haven't seen it. Oh, you got to watch it.
I can't believe you haven't seen it.
Exactly,
you need to watch this movie.
That little conversation that we've all had is basically the genesis. Well, this is another one that people always talk about. What is better, the book or the movie or TV series that the book is based on, right? It's a debate people have had over the years, so that is what we are doing today, and the book we are covering is 11/22/63 by Stephen King, which is a fantastic book. What do we like about the book? What do we like about the show? That's what we're going to get into. Also, how do they compare, and what do we like better? Ultimately, that is what we are going to find out on today's episode. Spoiler alert.
Yes, we will be talking about the book and the TV series. Right. Not giving away everything, but still, we're going to be talking about it. So if you haven't seen it, then read the book.
Exactly. Read the book, watch the series. They are different in some ways, so there are differences, and also, you know, we're not going to be watching ourselves for spoiling the show. So just keep that in mind. Read the book, watch the show before you tune into this. All right, Brandon, why don't we get a little bit of background?
Yeah, so the background, 11/22/63. It's a novel written by Stephen King, as you said, and they released it in November of 2011. And it's a story about a guy that travels back in time to stop the assassination of JFK, John F. Kennedy. It was Stephen King's 60th book overall. 60 books.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And his 49th novel. And what he said initially was the idea came to him in 1971, and before he released the novel Carrie. Yeah. So it goes back a while.
Yeah, and Carrie was his first novel in 1974. So this was 3 years before he ever released a novel, and he already had the idea for this. And then 40 years later, eventually releases the book. But he did say that it was a very difficult book to write because of the amount of research he had to do.
I would imagine you have to go back and look at everything that happened back then.
To make it as accurate as possible to the time period, and we're talking about the late 50s and early 60s, you know, to make it as real as possible, he had to do a lot of research. And he said, you know, I never really wrote a book like that before. Even though he has written books that take place in other time periods, he's never done one that's this detailed, where a character is literally interacting with the past in such a way that you have to have the detail about the past. So really, really cool. And it was reviewed really well. It actually won a couple of awards. The 2011 Los Angeles Times Book Prize for Best Mystery/Thriller and the 2012 International Thriller Writers Award for Best Novel. 16 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. And according to Metacritic, 30 out of 36 reviews on the book were positive. So overall, people really liked it. It won awards. A lot of people bought it. And it was very, very popular. And I saw a lot of things where critics said, you know, this is King's best novel in a decade, right?
Really,
like a lot of people were saying stuff like that.
And you can see why they feel that way, because it's so well written, and the story is incredible. Like, it's just a great story.
Absolutely. So why don't we get into the story a little bit and talk about the main characters that pop up throughout the book, and really just the main characters here. So starting off with Jake Epping / George Amberson. Jake Epping is the main character.
He's the man. He's the guy that has to go back and change the past, which doesn't like to be changed, by the way.
Yep. Jake Epping is his name in the present day, and George Amberson is the name he uses as a that's his fake name in the past. Al Templeton is the guy who owns the diner that basically tells him about this time portal that he can travel back in time, and he's the one who pushes him towards going back and trying to stop.
And he had gone back in the past before as well and tried to do it, but he ran. Things happened, and he wasn't able to do it. He got sick.
He couldn't finish the task. Harry Dunning is a janitor that works at the school that Jake Epping teaches at, and Jake teaches like an adult class, and Harry was taking that class and wrote an essay about his childhood, where we find out that his mother and his siblings were all killed by his dad.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that a little bit later on, and that's one of the big parts of the book, the big turning points in there. Deke Simmons, the principal of the school that Jake works at in the 60s, he hires Jake on, and they form a friendship.
Right, in the small town of Jody, Texas in the early 60s. Jake starts working at that school. Ms. Mimi, she is a school librarian librarian, and she ends up marrying Deke until she ultimately passes away. Sadie Dunhill is a very important character. She is Jake's girlfriend slash fiance in the early 60s. Jake saves her from her ex-husband, who actually badly disfigures her before taking his own life. She dies during Jake's attempt to stop Lee Harvey Oswald from killing JFK. Ultimately is alive again when Jake resets the portal and thus resets time.
One of my favorite characters in the book.
Absolutely. Oh, a fantastic character. And Ellen Doherty is another teacher who has a very big role in the book, but not in the TV series, as we'll discuss later. And she's a very good friend to Sadie and Jake, and she takes over for Deke as the school principal in the 60s. And then there are some historical characters like Lee Harvey Oswald and his real-life wife, Marina, George de Mohrenschildt, who is a Soviet expat and a friend of Lee's, and he's a guy that a lot of conspiracy theorists like to talk about. He's one of those guys, like, how much is he involved in everything? And obviously...
That was the guy that that wasn't the recording guy, right? The guy that was recording the drive-by.
No. That's his friend. That's
right. Okay.
So FBI agent James Hosty, who is a real guy, and Dr. Malcolm Perry, who actually in the book treats Jake when he's attacked by a bunch of thugs down in Texas. He is the same doctor that treated Kennedy and Oswald after they were both shot, and they actually put him into the book as well. So you got the characters, we got a little bit of the plot and some background on the book. So, Brandon, why don't we start with you? What are your thoughts on this novel?
Okay, so let's start with the fact that I haven't read a novel in a long time. It had been a while. I'm used to reading a lot of music books and bios. I read a lot, but it's not. I don't read a lot of stories.
You read a lot of nonfiction.
Nonfiction, and so it was refreshing. And I told you I couldn't put the book down. I literally couldn't put it down. Like, it's just a page turner.
Yeah, it's got over 800 pages.
Yeah,
it's
you
a long almost
book.
Read it in an entire weekend.
I almost finished it in a whole weekend. And Stephen King's got a way of writing that it just sucks you in.
Yeah.
If you read, I've read a lot of his books over the years, and each one, the way that he paints a picture of a scene, it really like pulls you in and makes you think like you're there, right?
Yeah.
And obviously, the book has a lot more detail than the TV show does. That's to be expected.
Yeah.
The novel sees Jake spending a lot of time alone. I wasn't bored, though, because, you're intrigued as to what's going to happen. Yeah. He's traveling all over the place, and he's by himself. But you're learning his thoughts. There's different storylines going around. And you just have to keep moving forward with it. I think a lot of that has to do with the detail that they put into it. And I said this to you before, Eryk. Where is my Sadie? Sadie is one of the best characters in the book. I need to meet a girl like Sadie.
Oh, I know.
She's perfect.
Yeah, that's right.
There's nothing that you can say bad about Sadie.
Right.
She's wholesome. She's a good person.
Yes.
She's totally in love with Jake.
Yes.
The way the relationships unfolds is really well documented in the book. And the whole sense, this is what I think was probably my favorite part, the whole sense of time travel in the book. Like, it's always been fascinating to me. I mean, we've talked about Back to the Future and stuff like that. So when you read a story about someone traveling back in time to alter the past for the sake of humanity into the future, I think it makes for a good story.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to start there as well with my thoughts on the book, because that really is the thing that made me want to read this book in the first place. I am fascinated with the topic of JFK's assassination, really with his entire life, really. He's really the only American president I have any interest in.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not American, and I've actually been to his presidential library in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and so I'm fascinated with the guy and the surrounding of his death. And so this is a topic I've read a lot about and seen a lot of documentaries about. So that immediately hooked me. And this time period is a time period that I would have loved to have seen firsthand. So yes, the whole idea of traveling back in time to this time period is
so cool.
It just totally, that was like right up my alley. Yeah. I got to read this book. And you mentioned Stephen King and the detail that he puts in. And one thing that, some people have criticized his works for over time is the length of his books. And I've read 5 Stephen King books, but 4 of them are short novellas, right?
Yeah.
And so this is the only full-length Stephen King novel I've ever read, and I could see why people would bring that up. However, I actually don't mind, because he is so good at writing details. And we mentioned the research he did for this book. I mean, just every
single detail
he talks
there.
about Jake walking down the street in Dallas in 1961 or whatever, and a bar door opens and you hear Jan and Dean singing about Surf City and all this, and it's like
you could picture
yes,
it.
Exactly.
You just picture it.
It's just so perfect. So the fact that he takes a few extra pages to describe something,
I'm okay with
fine.
that. Yeah.
Totally fine.
Absolutely.
I didn't mind the length of the book at all. In fact, I didn't want it to end. So it could have been 5,000 pages. Who cares? There's one thing you mentioned is Sadie. I mean, and really one of the most important things in this book is the relationship between Jake and Sadie. And I'm glad he didn't make it sappy.
Was it at all? No,
exactly.
It was perfect.
Yeah, I think it was.
To say
as good as it could have been, because it's such an important relationship in the book, and so many things happen based on that relationship, and so much of the suspense is because of that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the fact that it wasn't just like he didn't just make it a sappy love story, I think is a very good thing. Was very well written, and I mean, I think the reason why his stories pull you in and make you want to keep reading is because he is like the master of suspense and thriller and all this kind of stuff, and making the past obdurate, making the past not want to change, makes it, like the whole book is suspenseful. Because every time he goes to change something,
something
the
terrible
past
happens.
hits back, right? and
Exactly.
doesn't want to change. And so, I mean, it's 800 some odd pages, and it keeps pulling you in because things keep happening to the guy. Within days of the assassination, like something huge happens to him,
right?
To slow him down. It's just unbelievable. And so I absolutely love this book. It's one of my favorite novels. And a lot of people get on Stephen King and say, he's not. Say he's like a pop writer or something, like English lit teachers look down on him. But
it's Stephen King.
It's Stephen King. Like, he's so great. The thing is, like, okay, so a writer like James Joyce, English lit teachers worship the guy. I've read one of his books. It's good.
Yeah.
It's not nearly as enjoyable as a Stephen King book, right? I mean, Stephen King books are just so much fun to read, and I don't see why that makes it
I think
bad.
they're fun to read because they're so messed up in a sense. Like, I mean, this one wasn't necessarily messed up, but like you read some of his other stories, The Shining, The Stand, like they're just there's crazy stuff, supernatural things going on, and I think that's a big part of it too.
Exactly.
Like,
his books are so much fun to read. I don't get why that makes it him a lesser writer.
No.
Because his books are fun to read. I think that makes him a very good writer.
Exactly.
And the amount of books he has sold over the years, I think, backs that up. But whatever. Who cares?
Can't
We're not
please everybody.
English lit
Yeah,
teachers.
exactly.
All right. So why don't we give a little background now on the TV series? Because we've shared our thoughts on the book, got a little background on the book. A few years ago, a series was made. So
so it debuted on Hulu. It was February of 2016, and it was executive produced by J.J. Abrams, Stephen King, Bridget Carpenter, and Brian Burke, and it was produced by James Franco, who also plays Jake George Amberson.
Right.
But like those names right there, J.J. Abrams, that's the first one that stood out to me.
Yeah. And actually, it's funny that this has an interesting production history. The first guy to have the rights to this story was the late Jonathan Demme, the great director. And he ended up giving up the rights because he had some serious disagreements, I think, with Stephen King and some other people about what he actually wanted to be put into the story. And it was going to be a movie. So they would have had to take a lot out.
That's what I don't understand. Like, why would you have a problem with, like, I know you want to adapt the book or the movie to the book, but like you're gonna give Stephen King a hard time.
I know, but I mean, if you think about like a 2-hour movie, and it's a 800-page, so much happens.
You need to have a miniseries.
I think they just had disagreements about what he wanted to take out and what he was going to put in, and so he ultimately gave it up. J.J. Abrams swooped in and got it, even though James Franco really wanted the rights to make this. In fact, he loved this book so much that he wrote an essay on Vice about it, which I read, and he really loves this story. And in the essay, he talks about like, really, J.J. Abrams, come on, and like he's really mad about it. So anyway, somebody read the essay. Somebody who was, I believe it was Bridget Carpenter actually, who read the essay and thought, okay, why don't we try to get this guy to be a part of it? So they offered him the lead role as Jake Epping / James Amberson in the show.
And then gave him an executive or a producer credit.
A producer role, and also he said, let me direct an episode as well. And so they let him do that. And so so they got him as the star and one of the directors and producers of the show. Some of the other stars in the show, Chris Cooper plays Al Templeton. Sadie Dunhill, our favorite character, is played by a fantastic Canadian actress, Sarah Gadon. Daniel Weber is Lee Harvey Oswald. George McKay is Bill Turcotte, who is a character that I believe has a small role in the book, but he certainly does not have the role that he has in this show. Leon Rippey plays Harry Dunning. Nick Searcy plays Dick Simmons, and Tanya Pinkins plays Miss Mimi. And the show was well reviewed. Rotten Tomatoes gave it 80% by critics and 88% by users. So people really liked the show, absolutely. So what are your thoughts on the TV version?
So I think they did a really good job of portraying the book and bringing it to life on the screen. There was enough similarities to the book where you really could have watched the series without knowing each and every detail that was in the book. That was written between 800 pages. Obviously they added the Hollywood touch to it.
Yes.
They're going to do that. It makes it more entertaining, right?
Yes.
The scene, I think, where he gets beat up by the gangsters was a lot more brutal in the book. Almost to the point where he was close to death. He couldn't walk. His knee was all messed up. Yeah. Granted, he did end up in a coma in the show. But in the book, it just, again, we go back to the detail, right?
I think, how much... most things that happen to these characters in the book are a lot more brutal than they are in the show.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, that's understandable, too, because you can only do so much. We know he had the memory loss. It was a big part of how things came together at the end. But he was beat up real bad in the book, either way. The way he meets Sadie in the TV show, too, it's a chance encounter at a bus stop. I think they could have done that the same way as they did in the book. They should have done it, in my opinion, because they met in school. She was already teaching at the school, right? Or in the library.
They met at a, I think it's like at a party at, I think, Deke's house.
Yeah, they were dancing or something. And she was all clumsy and falling over.
And that's how they met. But in the show, I think they meet in the second episode.
It's at the bus stop. And then they don't meet again until a couple more... Or, well, maybe the third episode. But either way, I think they could have done that the same as the book. Yeah. But overall, I'd recommend the show to someone who's looking to watch a great story unfold, right? And at the same time, I'd recommend reading the book, too, because... and which one do first? I don't know. We both read the book first. And I think that's probably the way I would go if I was going to recommend it to somebody.
Okay, well, my thoughts on the show, I mean, obviously, very good adaptation of the book, and it is an 800-page book, and there's only so much you could put into an 8-episode miniseries, and so I think they did a very good job. Obviously, just from a visual aspect, they nail the early 1960s aesthetic. A lot of the show,
all the old cars and everything,
exactly,
and the clothes, and
just really well done in that aspect. A lot of the show is shot in Ontario, except for the scenes in Dallas. Obviously, Dealey Plaza and all that was actually shot in Dallas. But many small towns across Ontario, Ayr, I think even Hamilton. There's some scenes. Anyway, they shot a lot around here because we have a lot of old towns that still look kind of like the 1960s, and so they nailed that. I mean, the whole aesthetic and the whole setting of it was really, really well done. I think there are a lot of great performances here, mainly from James Franco and Sarah Gadon. I think, as I mentioned when I was talking about the book, their relationship is one of the most important things in the book, and they really had to be good. And their chemistry was just incredible in this. And I think
really tell that they were right into the roles.
Exactly. They did a fantastic job. So I think that was great. It's very different from the book, which is to be expected. As I said, it's a very long book. A lot happens. So they had to figure out what stays and what goes, and I don't know. I don't think some of the changes were necessarily better. Some of the changes that they made, some of them I understand. Like you said, he spends a lot of time alone in the book, and so I could understand why on a TV show they wouldn't want to put a guy on screen alone
it
for
makes sense.
hours.
What are they going to do? Just have it thinking to himself or something?
Or have it narrated, which is what Scorsese would have done, as we talked about a couple weeks ago. But no, so they gave him Bill Turcotte, this character who appears very early on in the book when he's saving Harry's family. They put him as his travel companion and have him play his brother basically.
He messes everything up.
I know, and I don't necessarily like the character that much, and I understand completely why they did it, why they put him in, but I don't know. I wasn't thrilled about that.
I didn't like that in the book or in the movie.
Then for the most part, some of the things that they took out, I didn't mind too much. I mean, he does go to Florida in the book before he goes to Texas and does some gambling down there and has a run-in with some gangsters down there and all that kind of stuff. And he does save another person up in Maine, a little girl from a hunting accident.
Right.
Remember, he does that. So, I mean, there's a lot that they didn't put into this book, but also
But
in
was
the
it
book,
necessary for the show?
I don't think it was. I don't think
so.
it was necessary.
No.
In the book, he goes back to 1958. In the show, he goes back to 1960. That's where the
So he's got
time
a little bit
portal
more
resets.
time, yeah.
So by taking those 2 years off, they can condense things a bit. I think that was the right choice. But there were some changes that I wasn't crazy about. But overall, I think it was a very, very good series. And I think if people didn't read the book, they would have enjoyed this series.
Yeah, exactly.
Very much. And I think people who do read the book, like the two of us, also enjoy this series. Now, let's talk about our favorite moments, our favorite scenes from the book and the TV series. What are some of yours?
So, yeah, I'll start with the show. When he's in the parking lot talking to Sadie's ex-husband and he just tears him down.
Oh, yeah.
That was probably one of the best, my favorite scenes of the whole thing. Just the way he is just so angry towards him, and the guy, you can tell, is shook.
Well, I love that he's swearing like a person in 2011 or 16.
And
the
like
other
somebody
guy
would talk now, and the guy's just like dumbfounded, like he can't believe
he's
what
just
he's hearing.
a shocked Southern Christian from 1961 or whatever.
I like the way they had the surveillance set up too to keep an eye on Oswald. That was pretty cool. They had the whole FBI system, it seemed, like wired up in the apartment. I thought that was kind of neat. And another part in the show was when Oswald was assembling and disassembling his rifle.
Oh, yeah.
And then they took the picture, and then they actually showed that picture.
Yes.
That he had the flyers,
The
like
famous
the real
picture,
life
the newspapers and all
the
that.
newspapers, in the book, the Halloween scene, how that unfolded, was one of the best storytelling. I think when I was reading it, the detail
when he saves
Harry's family. Yeah, when he goes in there and he does it twice. He goes back again because
he fails the first time.
Yeah, in the book,
and then the second time he goes back and doesn't wait till Halloween.
Yeah,
remember he kills Harry's dad
right
in a
cemetery. Right? Yeah, and so that was another part of the book that I really liked. And near the end of the book, when Harry returns after killing Oswald, or not Harry, Jake, and he meets with Harry, the story that Harry tells is the detail in that as to why the world is in shambles. And I thought that was really cool. He explains what happens between 1963 and 2011, why the world is in the state that it is.
Because it's like apocalyptic.
Yeah,
basically.
they've got nuclear war. Kennedy refused to go to Vietnam. George Wallace, who was his successor, reversed the decision to use nuclear weapons, and then nuclear war breaks out. Terrorists, other organizations are starting to shoot nukes all over the place. So I just thought that was cool how they told how you figure out why it's so bad.
Exactly, because he thought it was going to be this perfect utopian society and everything.
But everything was just terrible.
And it was
just
goes to hell.
It's funny because everyone's saying, "Oh, what would have happened if Kennedy never died?" And then you look at this, and it's like the worst possible thing ever that could have happened.
I don't think it would have gone quite this badly.
No, but I mean that's the story,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it was smart of him to do that. To make it that bad. And so some of my favorites. I like when he's in Maine in 1958 in the book. He comes across the kids from It.
Oh, yeah. That's right.
And they're dancing to In the Mood by Glenn Miller, which I'm glad he chose a song, like a popular song for this, because I could hum the song in my head as I'm reading about these kids dancing. And then he goes up to them, and doesn't he teach them how to do a dance to In the Mood?
Yeah, I think so.
Because he and his ex-wife had taken dance lessons.
Yeah.
And then when he goes down to Texas and they have the dance in the gym with Sadie when they're both
he knows what he's doing.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, in the book they don't, or in the show they don't use "In the Mood" by Glenn Miller. They just I can't remember what song they used.
I don't remember what the song was.
So I don't know. I thought that was cool in the book how that song kind of tied from his modern life with his wife to meeting these kids in Maine to dancing with Sadie.
And the fact that he ties in characters from another book too is really cool.
And that's something he does all the time.
Yeah, that's based in 1958. It was as well, and so he's obviously there. And he just so happens to come across these kids, and it's those ones. And it's just, I think that's so cool.
And everything's in Maine.
Every story happens in Maine.
So when he goes back and stops Harry's father, Frank, from killing Harry's siblings and their mother on Halloween night, again, you mentioned it. That's one of my favorite scenes as well. And I prefer how it was done in the book. I think they spent a little bit too much time with Frank Dunning, Harry's father.
Beforehand, going to the slaughterhouse
I
and
don't
drinking
care
in the
that
bar.
much about that character.
Yeah.
And so that's one change I think that I didn't mention earlier, but that's one change that I think I'm not as thrilled about, is that they spent all that time with Frank Dunning. I just don't care about that character. I'm happy with the way they did it in the book, where he goes back and thinks, I'll just wait till Halloween night and I'll stop him in the act.
Yeah.
Fails, gets injured. Remember, I think Frank
Somebody
hits him with a hammer or something.
So, yeah.
And one of Harry's siblings ends up dying anyway, so he doesn't save the whole family. And then he comes back to present time to reset the clock, basically, and finds out that Harry died in Vietnam anyway.
Yeah.
And so he's like, just like
so many things.
Many things went wrong.
Yeah.
So then he goes in without any preparation and just decides, you know what, I'm just going to wait for Frank to be alone, and I'm just going to shoot him.
Yeah.
And gets it. I think that's such a better way of handling it. Yeah, I didn't need to meet Frank Dunning.
No.
And Josh Duhamel and everything. He did it well.
He did a good job of being a terrible person in that role, I mean.
So when Sadie's ex-husband goes crazy, you mentioned the scene in the parking lot. So the scene where he actually goes crazy and disfigures her in the book and the show, that's one of those moments in the book where, like you mentioned, Sadie is like one of the great characters and
beautiful.
Yes, you don't want anything bad to happen to Sadie, but based on Stephen King and the fact that the past doesn't want to be changed, something is going to happen to Sadie. So then when he gets this phone call from her crazy ex-husband and says, you might want to come over, and we find out that she's been disfigured.
Yeah.
It's just like one of those scenes that it's like...
He's got her head covered with the thing. There's blood all over. Oh, it's awful. But I mean,
it's awful. Yeah. But it's just one of those things that, like, that's Stephen King, right? We knew something was going to happen, and sure enough, it happened. And then in the book, I believe Deke and Ellen show up and
try to save him anyway.
And I think her ex-husband ends up killing himself in the book, and then in the show, Sadie and Jake
fire poker to the head. He gets shot.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Another one. I have a couple more. Climbing the stairs of the book depository when they're on their way up to stop Lee Harvey Oswald, and just like everything gets in their way, and they're just like struggling their way up the stairs. That's, again, the master of suspense, Stephen King. I mean, it just makes it so tense. Like there's like 10 pages of them walking upstairs. You know what I mean? And it's just so tense, and ultimately they get there and stop Lee Harvey Oswald two different ways between the book and show. In the book, the police on the ground hear the gunshot go off. They turn around and shoot and end up killing him.
Right.
And in the show, Jake kills him.
Yeah.
And then the very ending, when Jake goes back to Texas to meet an 80-year-old Sadie, he Googles her and finds out that she's actually did survive the attack from her ex-husband. Even without him there, she does end up surviving the attack and lives a very long life and ends up getting like all these awards and everything. And so he goes down to Texas, and I believe they dance again to In the Mood by Glenn Miller.
Yeah, see, and that part of the book and the show was exactly the same.
It's more or less the same.
It ended exactly how it was written in the book.
Although the one weird thing about the ending of the show was that, because Sadie has mentioned to Jake that, I have cousins up in Lisbon, Maine, and I was there 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And then, so he goes back to reset time, and he decides, I'm going to go find Sadie here in Lisbon, Maine, because he knew that she was there at the time. And
sure enough, she drives by in the car and the reset, right?
Yeah, and I don't know if that...
that wasn't in the book.
Yeah, it wasn't in the book. I think that that didn't need to be in there.
No, that was something that probably didn't need to go.
No, but so we've talked about the book, we've talked about the show. The question that really started this whole thing, what do you like better, Brent?
Well, it's a great TV series, like we've said. Like many of the movies and shows that exist, nothing compares to a book.
Right. Oh, okay.
In my opinion. There's always so much more in the book, the more of the detail, and that's fine. You can only squeeze so much into an 8-episode miniseries. So overall, I like the book better, but not to take away from the TV show. I like them both.
Yeah.
If I had to choose, I'd take the book over the movie or over the show.
I would also take the book over the movie, and the reason why I think mostly is because I read the book first.
Yeah, and that could be why too. Yeah,
and I was just so familiar with the story as it was laid out in the book that I knew there was going to be changes because I knew they wouldn't be able to fit everything in. But like I said, some of the changes I wasn't as crazy about. And so I prefer the story as it's told in the book. I understand why they made the changes in the show, and I really like the show. And I would recommend the show to anybody.
Yeah, definitely recommend it.
But I would especially recommend the book if you have, a month to read the thing.
If you have some time. It's a page turner, though. It's a book.
Page turner. It's very good. I would recommend both. I mean, I like them both, but the book, I certainly prefer the book. So anyway,
that's it.
Concludes our discussion. 11/22/63 by Stephen King in the series. So our next episode, we're going to be returning to movies, and this is going to be your choice for our next episode. So what movie are we going to be watching?
So we're going to do The Big Short, movie about how the bubble crashed exactly. Basically back in 2008. Christian Bale's in it. Who else is it? I can't off the top
Ryan
of my
Gosling?
head. Yeah, Ryan Gosling's in it. There's a whole bunch of cameos. Margot Robbie makes an appearance in it. So we'll talk about that. And we'll compare. Well, there's a book too, but we're not gonna.
Funnily enough, I have read the book.
Yeah, so
and
you know
I haven't
the story.
seen the movie, but you haven't read the book and you've seen the movie. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, we're not going to do a book movie comparison, but we'll watch that next time, and we'll have some fun with it.
I'm looking forward to it. For Brandon, Shelby, Joe, and Lucas, I'm Eryk. This is Watch This. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for watching.